The stars once shone brightly with the promise of unity. Humanity had spread across the galaxy, forging alliances, exploring new worlds, and creating a prosperous future. But those days were long gone. In their place, a fragmented human race lived in scattered colonies, each one isolating itself from the others. The Solaran Empire, a power born of brutal militarism and unyielding control, had risen from the ashes of an old war, declaring dominion over the galaxy. Their iron grip threatened everything humanity had built, and humanity, divided, was at the mercy of this rising power. Captain Alina Valerius stood on the observation deck of the Vanguard, staring out at the swirling nebulae beyond. The once proud human fleet was now reduced to a handful of scattered ships, their crews loyal to the cause, but broken by years of defeat. Unity, the very idea that had once been humanity's strength, seemed more like a distant dream than a tangible reality. But Alina refused to give up. Her mission was clear: unite the scattered colonies of humanity, rally their forces, and prepare to take a stand against the Solaran Empire. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Decades of distrust and war had splintered humanity into factions that barely spoke to one another, let alone fought together. Some had turned to isolationism, cutting off all ties to Earth and other colonies, while others had embraced fringe ideologies that bordered on radicalism. Yet Valerius, with her past as a diplomat and a soldier, believed that unity was still possible if she could just find the right allies. The Vanguard dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nova Archipelago, a cluster of former human colonies that had declared their independence years ago. The ships here were rumored to be among the most advanced in the galaxy, highly independent, fiercely loyal to their own cause, and deeply suspicious of Earth's authority. Alina couldn't blame them. Earth had abandoned these colonies when they were at their most vulnerable, but it was time to change that. "I don't think they'll let us land without a fight, Captain," said Lieutenant Marcus Hale, the Vanguard's tactical officer. He had been with Alina since the beginning of her campaign, and his calm demeanor had become an anchor for the crew. His dark eyes flicked over the sensors, tracking the incoming signals from the colony's defense fleet. "We're not here to make a fight, Marcus. We're here to make an offer," Alina replied, her voice resolute but tinged with the weight of her doubts. She was more than aware of the challenges ahead. These colonies had lived without Earth's interference for decades. Would they listen to her, or would they see her as just another in a long line of failed promises? The radio crackled to life, and a deep voice came through the static, laden with suspicion. "This is General Corps of the Nova Archipelago. State your business, Vanguard." Alina's hand tightened around the armrest of her command chair as she replied, "General Corps, this is Captain Alina Valerius of the Vanguard. We come in peace, with an offer of unity and a chance to stand against the Solaran Empire." There was a long pause. Alina could almost feel the weight of Corps' decision, the tension crackling in the air. Then, finally, he spoke. "We'll hear you out, Captain. But if you think you can just waltz in here and convince us to drop our weapons, you're sorely mistaken." Alina's lips curved into a faint smile, a glimmer of hope flickering in her chest. Maybe it wasn't too late for unity after all. As the Vanguard was cleared for docking, Alina steeled herself for the difficult conversations ahead. She knew that General Corps and his people were hardened by years of independence. But they weren't the only ones who had suffered. She had seen firsthand the damage done by the Empire, and if they didn't act soon, the galaxy would fall under Solaran rule, and humanity would lose everything it had ever fought for. Her thoughts were interrupted by the voice of her first officer, Commander Leah Trask. "Captain, we've received new intel. The Solaran fleet is moving in. They'll be here in less than 48 hours. Alina's jaw tightened. The clock was ticking. "We don't have time to waste, then. We must convince them, Leah, for all our sakes." As the Vanguard docked with the station and the doors hissed open, Alina took a deep breath, stepping into the unknown, knowing that the future of humanity rested on her ability to forge the impossible, a unity that could defy the Empire's rule. The fate of the stars had never seemed so uncertain. This continuation focuses on the tension between the protagonist's mission and the fragmented state of humanity, setting the stage for the challenges ahead. The conflict is immediate, and the stakes are clearly defined, ensuring that the reader remains engaged from the start. The Vanguard remained docked in the shadow of the massive station at the heart of the Nova Archipelago. The low hum of the engines was the only sound that accompanied Captain Elena Valerius as she made her way through the sterile corridors of the station. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. The station was once a hub of human ingenuity and unity, a relic from the days when humanity had stood together against the unknown. Now it was a forgotten monument to a lost era. General Kor, along with a small contingent of his officers, awaited her arrival in a large briefing room. The walls were adorned with old insignia from the human expansion era, remnants of an age long past. Kor stood at the center of the room, arms crossed, his gaze unwavering. He was a man who had seen war, and his scars, both physical and emotional, were evident. Elena Valerius, Kor greeted her, his voice cold but not unfriendly. "I hope you've come prepared to convince us that your cause is worth joining." "We're not asking you to follow blindly, General," Elena replied, her voice steady. "We're asking you to see the truth. The Solaran Empire is not just a threat to Earth, but to all humanity. If we don't unite, we will fall." Kor scoffed, shaking his head. "Unite? You've come to the wrong place if that's what you're offering. My people have lived without the crumbling bureaucracy of Earth for decades. We forged our own way. Why would we risk it all for a dying ideal?" "I'm not asking for your allegiance just for Earth's sake," Elena said, locking eyes with him. "I'm asking because we're running out of time. The Solaran Empire has already begun their assault on human colonies, and they won't stop until we're all under their control. They've already invaded the outer colonies. What makes you think you're any safer?" At that, Kor paused. Elena could see the crack in his resolve. His expression softened for a brief moment before hardening once more. "There's something else," he said, his voice lowering. "Something I didn't want you to know. Something that could change everything." Elena's heart skipped. "What is it?" Kor nodded to one of his officers, a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes, who stepped forward with a data pad. She handed it over to Elena, and the captain's gaze locked onto the screen. The file detailed the location of an ancient human facility buried deep within an uncharted system. It was a facility from the early days of the expansion wars, before humanity's first major defeat at the hands of an unknown alien race. The facility, known as Project Eclipse, was a joint effort between Earth's government and several other colonies. But after a catastrophic failure during its development, it had been abandoned and its records classified as lost. "Project Eclipse," Elena murmured, her mind racing. "I've heard whispers of it. The last great human weapon." Kor nodded gravely. "It's not just a weapon, Captain. It's the only weapon we have left that can turn the tide against the Solaran Empire. But the cost of using it, no one has ever dared to find out." Elena glanced back at him. "What exactly is this weapon?" "I don't know," Kor admitted. "None of us do. The facility was abandoned in the wake of the Solaran War, but the records we've uncovered indicate that it holds the key to a power that could change the course of history." Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. The implications were staggering. A secret weapon, perhaps even a weapon of mass destruction, hidden away for centuries. It could be humanity's salvation, or its doom. "We need to find it," she said, her voice resolute. "We need to know what it is and whether it's worth the cost. It could be our only chance to stop the Solaran Empire before it's too late." Kor studied her, his expression unreadable. "And if it's too dangerous, what then?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Then we'll find another way, but we cannot afford to sit idle. not with the Empire on our doorstep." Kor exhaled slowly, weighing her words. He turned to one of his officers, who quickly began preparations for a deep space reconnaissance mission to locate Project Eclipse. It would take time, more than Valerius wanted to spare, but there was no turning back now. As she left the room, her mind raced with the possibilities. The Solaran Empire was ruthless, but they were not invincible. The galaxy had hidden many secrets, and Project Eclipse could be one of its most dangerous. But it could also be the key to uniting humanity once more. She looked out at the stars, the dark void of space stretching endlessly before her. For the first time in months, there was a flicker of hope. But the road ahead was treacherous, and the weight of humanity's future rested heavily on her shoulders. This section builds on the tension introduced in Part 1, delving deeper into the mystery of Project Eclipse and hinting at the powerful, dangerous force humanity may have at its disposal. The stakes are higher, and the pace quickens as Elena is thrust into a new layer of the conflict, one that could hold the key to humanity's survival or its destruction. The days following the briefing were tense. Elena found herself pacing the Vanguard's bridge, her mind consumed by the revelation of Project Eclipse. What kind of weapon could humanity have developed all those years ago? And what price had been paid for its creation? It was a mystery that gnawed at her, an enigma she could not afford to ignore. If the Solaran Empire were to gain control of such a weapon, humanity's fractured colonies would have no chance of survival. The Empire would be unstoppable. General Kor had agreed to the mission, though his reluctance was palpable. The Nova Archipelago was an independent faction, and for them to assist an Earth-born captain, no matter the cause, was a sign of growing desperation. But Elena had seen the glimmer of hope in Kor's eyes when he'd spoken of Project Eclipse. Deep down, he believed it might be their last hope. Days passed as the Vanguard made its way to the uncharted system, where Project Eclipse was rumored to be hidden. The ship sailed through deep, uninhabited space, the crew's anxiety building with each passing hour. Elena spent most of her time in the command center, reviewing the data on Project Eclipse over and over again, trying to piece together its history. The files Kor had provided were sparse, fragmented, and largely redacted. What she did know was this: the project had been conceived as a response to the mysterious alien threat that had once ravaged human colonies, a threat that had nearly wiped out humanity's first expansion efforts. The weapon was said to be capable of neutralizing entire fleets, even entire planets, with a single activation. But it had been abandoned after a series of catastrophic accidents. No one had ever confirmed what had truly gone wrong, and the project was buried along with its secrets. "I've been looking over the coordinates," Lieutenant Hale spoke up, his voice cutting through Elena's thoughts. He stood next to her, eyes scanning the readouts on the holodable. "We're getting close to the system, Captain. There's a faint signal coming from the designated location. It could be a distress beacon, or something else." Elena nodded, her expression grim. "Prepare the boarding party. We're not sure what we'll find when we get there, but we need to be ready for anything." The Vanguard dropped out of hyperspace, the stars around them stretching into streaks of light as the ship emerged into a dark, desolate corner of the galaxy. The uncharted system was eerily silent, and the only thing that marked its existence was a small, uninhabited planet with a faint energy signature emanating from its surface. Elena's heart quickened. This was it, the place where Project Eclipse had been buried. The planet was surrounded by a dense asteroid field, making it difficult for ships to approach without risking damage. Elena gave the order to send down a small team equipped with advanced reconnaissance gear. A dozen soldiers, led by Commander Leah Trask, would accompany Elena herself on the ground mission. If there was any hope of uncovering the truth about Project Eclipse, it would be here, on this forgotten world. As they descended through the atmosphere, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far bigger than they could understand. The surface was barren, scarred by ancient impacts and ravaged by time. The location of the facility was buried deep beneath the planet's crust, hidden away in an underground labyrinth of tunnels and chambers. The team set up a temporary base camp just outside the facility's entrance. The doors were sealed tight, their intricate security systems no longer functional, leaving Elena and her team to bypass the ancient locks. She felt a sense of dread creeping over her as the doors finally groaned open, revealing the darkness beyond. Inside, the facility was vast, its halls lined with ancient equipment that seemed as though it had been abandoned in a hurry. The air was stale, thick with the dust of ages. The faint hum of dormant power systems buzzed in the distance. Elena could feel the weight of the place pressing down on her, as if the secrets of humanity's past were watching them. "We're in," Commander Trask's voice crackled over the comms, moving deeper. As they ventured further into the complex, they discovered a central chamber, a massive circular room with walls lined with strange alien-looking machinery. It was clear that this was no ordinary facility. Whatever Project Eclipse had been, it had been far more than just a weapon. It had been something far more dangerous. Elena's gaze swept over the room, her pulse quickening as she caught sight of a control panel at the center. It was old, the symbols on it faded, but there was something unmistakable about the way it pulsed with energy. "Captain," Hale's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You need to see this." Elena moved toward him, her heart pounding. He was standing in front of a large glass containment chamber, its contents obscured by a thick layer of dust. As she approached, the lights flickered on, revealing what lay inside. A human figure, frozen in time, lay encased in the chamber. It was a man, his features indistinguishable under the layers of frost, but the strange, unnatural markings on his skin suggested he had undergone some kind of radical transformation. A chill ran down Elena's spine. This was no ordinary soldier. This is the price of Project Eclipse," Elena whispered to herself. They had come for a weapon, but what they had found instead was a terrifying glimpse into the dark history of humanity's attempts to wield powers beyond their understanding. This section ramps up the mystery and tension as Elena and her team uncover the hidden facility. The discovery of the frozen figure and the strange markings hints at the dark consequences of Project Eclipse and the uncertainty of what they may have unleashed. The stakes continue to rise, and the mysteries of the weapon grow even more ominous. The silence in the chamber was oppressive as Elena stared at the frozen figure inside the containment pod. Her mind raced to make sense of what she was seeing. The man, or what was left of him, had once been human, but the markings on his skin were not of any human origin. They were like strange, jagged symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. His eyes were closed, his expression frozen in an eternal state of pain or shock, as if he had been caught in the moment of a transformation. "What is this?" Elena murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Commander Leia Trask stepped closer, her brow furrowed in concern. "It's not just a soldier, Captain. It looks like some kind of experiment, something more than human." Hale, who had been scanning the room with his handheld device, looked up sharply. "Captain, you need to see this." His voice was tight with urgency. Elena turned toward him, moving quickly as she crossed the chamber. Hale gestured toward a console on the far wall, which had sparked to life when the lights flickered on. The interface was crude, a mix of alien and human technology, but Hale was already working through the system's rudimentary commands. His eyes narrowed as he sifted through the data. "This," he said slowly, "appears to be a log. I'm getting records of experiments, lots of them, but there's one entry that stands out. It says, Subject Theta, the final phase of Project Eclipse, successful." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "What does it mean, successful?" Before Hale could answer, the room was filled with a low, ominous hum. The containment pod shuddered slightly, as if the figure inside had stirred. Elena took a step back, instinctively reaching for her sidearm. No, Hale muttered under his breath. The energy readings, they're spiking. Whatever power source was used here, it's still active. Alina's hand hovered over her weapon as the pod surface began to frost over once more. The eerie glow from the markings on the figure's skin flickered, then stabilized, casting an unnatural light across the chamber. The walls trembled, as if the very facility was waking up from its long slumber. "Captain," Trask's voice cracked through the tension. "We need to get out of here now. Whatever this is, it's dangerous." But before anyone could move, the pod's door began to open, slowly, with an unnatural creak. A hiss of air escaped from the containment chamber, and the frost around the figure's body shattered, revealing the full scope of its transformation. The figure inside wasn't just human anymore. It had evolved into something else. The man's skin was covered in dark, metallic scales, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity, and his hands were tipped with sharp claws. The creature's eyes snapped open, and Alina could feel the weight of its gaze on her. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Then, with a guttural sound, the creature moved. Its limbs twitched and spasmed, as if struggling to remember how to function. The eerie silence was broken by the rapid, ragged breaths that echoed through the chamber. The creature's eyes fixed on Alina, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. It was aware. It was alive. "What the hell is that thing?" Hale whispered, backing away, his voice shaking. Alina didn't answer. Her mind raced to process the situation. This wasn't just a weapon. It was something far more terrifying. The Eclipse Project had been a gamble to push humanity beyond its natural limits, to create a soldier who could fight the Empire's most powerful foes. But something had gone horribly wrong. This creature was no mere soldier. It was the failed result of a twisted experiment that had crossed the line into madness. The creature began to stir more violently, its breathing growing faster as it attempted to rise from the pod. Alina's instincts kicked in. She barked orders to her crew. "Get back to the Vanguard, now. We need to leave, and we need to leave fast." But the creature wasn't done. It let out a horrific roar as its body began to writhe and twist, snapping its new, grotesque limbs into place. The sound of its bones cracking echoed in the chamber. Alina's pulse hammered in her ears. This thing, this abomination, wasn't just a product of science gone wrong. It was an embodiment of the very dangers humanity had once tried to escape. The weapon had been born of desperation and fear. With terrifying speed, the creature lunged toward them, knocking over a heavy piece of equipment as it gained its footing. Alina ducked just in time, narrowly avoiding its claws. The chamber exploded into chaos as the team scrambled for cover, their weapons drawn. "Get to the exit," Alina shouted, firing her blaster at the creature. The shot missed, and the creature charged again, too fast for them to react. It was clear now this was not something they could contain. They had unleashed something far more dangerous than they ever could have imagined. "Alina!" Hale shouted, his voice panic-stricken as he fired another shot. "We need to get out of here now." But the creature's roar filled the chamber again, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Whatever Project Eclipse had created, it was not something that could be controlled, and it was only just beginning to wake up. This section deepens the horror and mystery surrounding Project Eclipse as Alina and her crew discover the true horrifying result of the project's experiments. The sudden emergence of the transformed creature adds a sense of urgency as they realize the danger is far more immediate and deadly than they ever anticipated. The stakes are raised, and the crew is forced to confront the reality of what they've unleashed. The Vanguard crew scramble through the narrow corridors of the underground facility, their minds clouded by the terror of what they had just witnessed. Alina led the way, her pulse hammering in her ears as she tried to maintain focus. The creature's roars echoed through the facility, growing louder and more menacing with each passing moment. The air felt charged, as if the very walls of the complex were alive with a terrible energy. Move faster, Elena barked, her voice cutting through the panic. Get to the extraction point, now. Commander Trask was already a few steps ahead, leading the soldiers with a fierce determination. Her rifle was raised, and her eyes darted from side to side, scanning for any signs of movement. They had entered the facility expecting to find answers, but what they had uncovered was far worse than anything they could have imagined. The creature they had unleashed was not just dangerous, it was an unstoppable force. "Captain, we've got a problem." Hale's voice came through the comms, his tone strained. Elena could hear the fear in his words. "The Vanguard's docking bay is compromised. The entire facility's power grid is starting to fail. If we don't get out of here soon, we'll be trapped." Elena's heart sank. The facility's failure wasn't just mechanical, it was something far worse. The creature was systematically tearing through the power systems, ripping apart anything that stood in its way. It was hunting them, and it was getting closer with each passing second. "Damn it," Elena muttered, her mind racing. They couldn't stay here much longer. They had to find another way out. The direct route to the extraction point was blocked by a collapsed passage, and the main elevator had been sabotaged by the creature's rampage. They were running out of options. "Trask," Elena called out as they turned a corner, "take the left flank and secure the secondary exit. We'll try to find another way to the surface." "Understood," Trask replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. She and her team broke off, disappearing into the shadows of the facility's corridors. Elena's team continued to move forward, adrenaline fueling every step. But as they neared the facility's central core, the air grew colder, and the oppressive hum of the power grid's malfunction intensified. Something was wrong. Elena slowed her pace, her instincts on high alert. They weren't alone. The creature was closer than she thought. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath their feet, and the lights flickered once again. A deafening roar rang out from the depths of the complex, and the sound of claws scraping against metal echoed through the hallways. The creature was upon them. "Get ready," Elena shouted, her voice steady despite the terror surging in her veins. She motioned for the team to take defensive positions, their weapons drawn and aimed at the shadows. The monster was no longer lurking, it was coming for them. And then it appeared. The creature, its grotesque form twisted and deformed, rounded the corner at breakneck speed. Its eyes burned with fury, and its claws scraped the floor, sending sparks flying as it charged toward them. Its body was a mass of shifting, jagged scales, the markings on its skin pulsating with dark energy. There was no mistaking it now. Project Eclipse had created something monstrous, something beyond comprehension. "Open fire," Elena ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. The soldiers fired in unison, their blaster bolts flashing through the dimly lit corridor. But the creature didn't falter. It swerved and leaped, its speed and agility unmatched by anything they had ever encountered. The blaster shots glanced off its tough, scaled hide, leaving only scorch marks as it charged forward, its roars shaking the very walls. "Retreat," Elena shouted, the order barely audible over the creature's growls. They couldn't stop it with conventional weapons. They had to get out, fast. The team turned and ran, sprinting through the twisting corridors, the creature hot on their heels. It was faster than they were, much faster, and it wasn't giving up. "We can't outrun it," Hale yelled as he ran beside Elena. "We need to find a way to stop it." Elena's mind raced. They needed a plan, and they needed it now. The secondary exit was still too far, and the creature was gaining on them. But there had to be something, anything, they could use to turn the tide. "Wait," Elena said, slowing down just long enough to glance around. Her eyes fell on a large, heavy door to the left. "There, we can trap it inside." She signaled to Hale, and the two of them raced toward the door, the rest of the team following close behind. They reached the control panel just as the creature rounded the corner. Elena punched in the access code, praying that the door still worked. The heavy metal door groaned and began to close, just as the creature lunged forward, its claws reaching for them. With a screech of metal, the door slammed shut, trapping the creature on the other side. But Elena knew this wasn't over. The creature was still alive, and it was still out there. They had bought themselves a few precious minutes, but they couldn't afford to stay in this hellhole any longer. "Let's go," Elena said, her voice cold with determination. "We move now, or we die here." The team rushed to the surface, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they sprinted toward the extraction point. Every step felt like a lifetime, and the noise of the creature's growls and snarls echoed in their ears. The world seemed to close in around them, the walls of the facility collapsing in on itself. Finally, they emerged into the light of the alien world's surface, the Vanguard waiting for them just beyond the clearing. The ship's ramp lowered, and Elena ushered her team inside. As they boarded the ship, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of the horror they had unleashed. They had found the creature, but the true nightmare had only just begun. This section intensifies the chaos and danger as Elena and her team race to escape the creature's wrath. The tension builds as they realize that the weapon they uncovered is not just a threat, it's an unstoppable force. The escape is narrowly achieved, but the creature remains a looming danger, and the true implications of Project Eclipse remain unclear. The stakes are higher, and the clock is ticking. The Vanguard roared to life as the ship ascended from the planet's surface, the once sturdy facility now crumbling in their wake. Elena remained silent in the command chair, staring at the shrinking landscape below. The cold emptiness of space stretched out before them, but even the stars didn't seem so distant anymore. The events they had just survived felt too raw, too fresh. There was no escaping what they had unleashed. "Captain, we're out of the atmosphere," Hale reported, his voice echoing over the comms from the operations station. He glanced over his shoulder. "But we've got incoming. The creature, it's following us." Elena's stomach clenched. She knew the creature was fast, but this was something else. There was no way it should have been able to survive the energy flux caused by their escape. Yet there it was, relentlessly pursuing them. It had adapted, evolved beyond their comprehension. "Do we have any sort of defense systems in place?" Elena asked, her voice calm despite the rising tension. "No," Hale answered. "The Vanguard shields are intact, but they won't hold up against something like that. It's more resilient than any force we've ever faced." Elena's eyes narrowed. The creature had been engineered, twisted into a form capable of unimaginable violence. It wasn't just a threat. It was a weapon meant to change the course of history. It had been given the means to track them, to survive, and perhaps even to fight back. They couldn't outrun it forever. "Set a course for the nearest station," Elena said. "We need a safe haven. We need time to figure out what we're dealing with." Hale hesitated. "There's an issue with that, Captain. I've been monitoring the creature's movements, and it's almost as if it can track us across space. No sensors, no transponders, just instinct." Elena's mind raced. Could it be? The creature wasn't just surviving, it was adapting. Somehow, it was able to follow them through space without the usual means of detection. This wasn't just biology at work. It was as if the creature was tapping into some unknown force, an ability far beyond what they had thought possible. "Can we throw it off?" Trask asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. "Change course, do something to confuse it?" "I'll try," Hale said, his fingers flying over the console as he attempted to alter the ship's trajectory. "But if it's as adaptable as I think it is, it might not matter. We could be in danger as long as it's still alive." Elena looked out of the forward viewport. Space, once so vast and unexplored, now felt confining, as though the endless void was closing in on them. They were being hunted. And yet, as she gazed at the stars, an unsettling thought began to form in her mind. The creature's relentless pursuit was no accident. It was part of something bigger. Project Eclipse, the very thing that had led them to this nightmare, wasn't just a series of failed experiments. It was part of a broader, far-reaching scheme. Whoever had created this abomination had planned for this. They had anticipated this moment. "We need to find out who's behind this," Elena said, her voice low but resolute. This was no accident. The Empire didn't just want weapons. They wanted something else, something they could control. Hale met her gaze, his face a mask of grim determination. What if they still do? Before Elena could respond, the ship lurched, and the warning alarms blared. The creature had caught up with them. "I'm diverting power to the shields," Hale shouted, his fingers working frantically. "It's too fast. I don't know if we'll make it." The creature slammed into the Vanguard's hull with an impact that rattled the ship from stem to stern. The sound of metal bending and groaning echoed through the command deck. Elena's heart skipped a beat. The creature was strong, stronger than any force they had ever encountered. They hadn't even seen its full power yet. The ship jolted again, and Elena was thrown from her seat. She managed to catch herself, grabbing the console for support. Her eyes darted to the tactical display, where the creature's silhouette now appeared as a distorted blur, pushing against the hull with an unrelenting force. "Shields are failing," Hale yelled, his voice barely audible over the rising cacophony. "We need to eject the escape pods now, or we're going to be ripped apart." "No," Elena snapped, her mind racing. "We're not abandoning ship. We fight. We survive." She couldn't lose them. Not now, not after everything they had endured. Trask's voice came through the comms, steady despite the chaos. "We need to engage it, Captain. We can't just outrun it. If we want any chance at surviving, we need to disable it, or at least slow it down." Elena nodded sharply. They had no choice. The creature was already tearing through the ship's defenses with ease. They needed a weapon, something powerful enough to give them a fighting chance. Her thoughts snapped back to the weapon systems hidden deep within the Vanguard. "Get us to the main weapons bay," Elena ordered. "We've got one chance to end this." Hale looked at her, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "Captain, we don't even know what kind of firepower we're dealing with here." "We don't have a choice," Elena replied, her tone hard. "We're going to make one." The Vanguard lurched again as another impact rocked the ship. Elena's crew moved swiftly, pushing forward toward the weapons bay. The battle for survival had only just begun. This section heightens the stakes as Elena and her team realize that escaping the creature may not be possible. Their only option is to confront it head-on, but the creature's adaptability and relentless nature push them to their limits. The tension between survival and desperation grows, and Elena begins to understand that this is part of a far larger conspiracy. The ship is no longer a sanctuary, it's a battleground. The Vanguard trembled as another violent strike from the creature reverberated through the hull. Elena could feel the ship's frame groan, its metal skeleton slowly succumbing to the unrelenting force outside. They were running out of time, out of options, and the cold realization settled in. If they didn't stop the creature now, the Vanguard wouldn't survive the next hit. "We're almost to the weapons bay." Hale's voice came over the comms, strained but determined. He and the rest of the crew were scrambling through the ship's corridors, racing against the clock. Elena stood at the bridge, hands gripping the console. Her eyes flickered over the status readouts. The ship's shields were down to less than 30%, and the damage reports from the lower decks were increasing by the second. The creature's claws had punctured the outer layers of the hull, leaving gaping holes that exposed the vacuum of space to the interior of the ship. Air pressure was becoming unstable in certain sections, forcing them to move quickly before the Vanguard became a death trap. "Captain, the creature's getting smarter," Trask said from her position on the bridge. "It's no longer attacking randomly. It's targeting our power cores. If it gets to those, we'll be out of options." Elena's mind raced. The creature's intelligence had surpassed what they had anticipated. It wasn't just a rampaging beast. It was hunting with purpose, as if it had been programmed with a specific goal. They couldn't afford to let it reach the power cores. "Can we reroute power to the weapon systems?" Elena asked. They needed more firepower if they were going to even stand a chance. Hale's voice crackled through the comms. "We're trying, but the power grid's failing. The secondary systems are only functional at minimal capacity. We can't fully charge the weapon array unless we get those cores stabilized." "We don't have time for stabilization," Elena snapped, her heart racing. The Vanguard wasn't going to last much longer, and neither were they if they didn't act fast. A blinding flash of light erupted from the aft of the ship as another direct hit from the creature sent a shockwave through the entire vessel. The hull shuddered violently, and the bridge lights flickered, plunging the crew into near darkness for a brief, terrifying moment. "Shields are gone," Hale shouted in panic. "It's going to breach us in seconds." Elena's chest tightened. "Hold on," she yelled to her crew, her voice a beacon of command in the chaos. "We're getting to the weapons bay. We're fighting back." Ahead of her, the doors to the weapons bay loomed, a final bastion between them and their only chance at survival. Elena didn't even wait for the doors to open fully before she was through, bolting into the dimly lit room filled with the hum of dormant weaponry. The moment they entered, she motioned for the crew to take their positions. The room was massive, the walls lined with powerful armaments that had never been used in actual combat. They were designed for defense, for the kind of threat that humanity had never encountered until now. Elena strode toward the central console, her fingers flying over the controls. "We need to get these systems online now. We've got one shot at this." Hale joined her at the console. His hands were shaking as he worked to bring the power grid to life. "I'm activating the pulse cannons. If the creature's following us the way I think it is, the pulse bursts should knock it off course long enough for us to get a direct shot." "Do it," Elena ordered, watching the data streams flicker on the screen. The pulse cannons had the potential to cause massive damage, but they were a one-time weapon. If they didn't destroy the creature with the first burst, they wouldn't get another chance. The deep hum of the Vanguard's weapon systems kicked into gear, the machinery groaning to life as the pulse cannon charged. Elena could feel the energy building in the room, the raw power surging through the ship's veins. This was their moment, the only chance they had to defeat the creature. "Firing in 5, Hale said, his voice steady, despite the tension. 4, 3, 2. And then, just as Hale hit the firing sequence, the ship lurched forward. The creature had breached the hull, its claws ripping through the metal like tissue paper. Elena's heart pounded as the monitors began flashing red with damage reports. They were too late. "No," Elena shouted, slamming her fist against the console. "Get the pulse cannons, now." The creature's grotesque, scaled form appeared in the viewport, its dark eyes glowing with unnatural intelligence as it charged directly at the ship's core. The pulse cannon was their only hope. They had no other weapon capable of stopping it. "Firing now," Hale called, his voice almost drowned out by the sound of the weapon charging. In that instant, a blinding, searing light exploded from the Vanguard's weapon array. The pulse burst shot out in a concentrated wave of energy, surging toward the creature at breakneck speed. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The creature's claws reached out, just as the pulse hit, the energy cracking against its scales like a hammer strike. The impact sent the creature flying back, its body writhing in the blast's wake, its shriek of agony filling the ship's hulls. Elena exhaled slowly, her eyes locked on the screen as the creature's form collapsed into the distance. It was still alive, but its movements were slower now, less precise. It had been injured, badly. "We've got it," Elena whispered, relief flooding her chest. But even as she spoke, the thought lingered in the back of her mind. Was it enough? This section ratchets up the tension as Elena and her team use the ship's final weapon to fight back against the creature. But even as they deal a significant blow, the fight is far from over. The creature may be wounded, but it is still very much a threat. The stakes continue to rise as Elena and her crew fight for their lives in the face of a relentless enemy. The moment the pulse cannon fired, the Vanguard shuddered violently. The ship's hull groaned under the strain of the immense energy released, and Elena felt every tremor through the soles of her boots. The creature had been hit, but it wasn't over yet. The distant form of the creature floated outside the viewport, still twitching, its massive body convulsing from the pulse's impact. It had survived, barely, but it was clearly struggling to recover. "Elena, it's still alive." Hale's voice cut through the tension, laced with disbelief. "The pulse cannon didn't kill it. It's just slowing down, but it's still coming for us." Elena didn't need to hear the confirmation. She had already seen the creature's resilience firsthand. Their one shot had weakened it, but the creature's tenacity was a force of nature. Its body was healing, its adaptive capabilities kicking in even as it floated in the cold vacuum of space, recoiling from the blast. "It's too strong," Trask murmured, her voice distant as she observed the creature through the viewport. "We can't just keep blasting it into oblivion." Elena's mind raced, her thoughts shifting as the urgency of their situation pressed down on her like a vice. They had no more weapons, no more options. Their ship was failing, and even if they destroyed the creature, they were no closer to finding answers. But there was one thing they still had: each other. "We can't fight it alone," Elena said, her voice sharp with resolve. "We need a strategy. We need to use the environment against it." "Captain, I don't understand," Hale replied, glancing up from his console. "The creature's too powerful for us to outlast. The ship's damage is critical. We're running out of air." "We're not running from it anymore," Elena said, her voice firm, cutting through the rising tension. "We're going to take it down together, not with weapons, but with our minds, with our will." Her crew exchanged looks of confusion, but Elena's steady gaze was enough to ignite a spark of determination in each of them. They knew she was right. They had to use the resources they had left, and they had to trust one another completely. "We're going to trap it," Elena continued, a dangerous edge in her voice. "There's a secondary airlock at the aft section. We're going to lure it there. Once it's inside, we'll vent the entire compartment into space. The vacuum will finish what the pulse cannon started." "Are you sure that will work?" Hale asked, voice tinged with doubt. "The creature's tough. It's been surviving in the vacuum already." "We don't have a choice," Elena replied, eyes hard with resolve. "It's our last shot. We're not going to outgun it, but we can outthink it." The crew, though exhausted and bruised from the constant assaults, nodded in agreement. They had been fighting for so long, but this was their final opportunity. If they failed, they would all perish. The pressure was immense, but the quiet determination in the air was palpable. Elena's command was swift, and the crew moved into action with practiced precision. They began maneuvering the Vanguard toward the aft section, using every ounce of power left in the ship to align themselves with the secondary airlock. The creature, disoriented but still deadly, was sluggish in its approach, but it was fast enough to keep the crew on edge. Its glowing eyes tracked their every move as if it knew their intentions. "Ready when you are, Captain," Hale called from the navigation console, sweat beading on his forehead. He was coordinating the maneuver, hoping the creature would follow their bait into the trap. "Now," Elena commanded. The crew activated the airlock. They had seconds to make their move before the creature would realize the trap. Elena, Trask, and Hale rushed to the control panels, manually sealing off every possible escape route in the corridor leading to the lock. Outside, the creature's massive form surged forward with terrifying speed. Elena could see its eyes widen, its body tense, realizing they had lured it into a confined space, but it was too late. It was inside the trap, and now they had no choice but to finish it. "Vent the chamber," Elena ordered. The airlock hissed as the seals disengaged, and with a violent burst of pressure, the doors opened. The vacuum of space rushed in, instantly sucking out any remaining air. The creature's body was thrown against the walls by the sheer force, its grotesque form crashing into the opposite side of the lock. It screeched, a primal cry of pain, as its adaptive system tried, and failed, to compensate for the lack of oxygen. The vacuum of space was unforgiving. It didn't give second chances. The creature fought, thrashing against the pull of space, but it was losing the battle. Its body began to tear apart as the void continued to rip at its structure. Alina's heart pounded in her chest as she watched, eyes fixed on the viewport, not daring to blink. For a moment, the creature seemed to pause, as if realizing it was defeated. Then, with a final pitiful scream, its body crumpled, lifeless, into the blackness of space. Alina let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her hands trembling as the enormity of what had just occurred began to settle in. They had won, but at what cost? The Vanguard was on the verge of collapse, the damage almost irreparable, and they had no answers about the true origin of the creature or its creators. "We did it," Trask said, voice soft, almost in disbelief. "But we're not out of the woods yet." Alina turned toward her crew, her expression somber but resolute. "No, we're not. But we've taken the first step. We survived. And that was enough for now." In this final part, Alina and her crew faced their last desperate gamble to defeat the creature by using the ship's environment to their advantage. The trap they set and their teamwork reflect their growth and resilience. Though the creature is finally defeated, the chapter ends with an uncertain future, leaving room for new challenges to come.